Ukraine's most recent move has likewise been a huge success. When their munitions trucks blew up, the Russian soldiers were taken aback. The Russian soldiers had a difficult day because their meals could not be delivered to the headquarters. Russia's careless mistakes have had irreversible effects in Lyman. The Russian government has let down its army yet again. Russian soldiers who were coerced into fighting raised their rebel flags with an amazing tactic. The Ukrainian army has trapped the Russian soldiers. In contrast, the Russian soldiers had made no preparations for such a big operation. As a result, the Russian army, which had suffered a tremendous defeat, lost a convoy vehicle. Russian soldiers faced horrific results when ammo was transferred to the Ukrainian army. With nowhere to flee, the soldiers were forced to surrender. The Ukrainian army's captured soldiers have made amazing statements. The operation progressed as follows. Ukraine was well aware that the Russian army had been suffering from a severe dearth of ammunition and supplies for some time. Ukraine, which wants to cope with this issue, has begun working to ensure that the Russian army is unable to meet its needs and weakens even further. Ukraine dispatched flag officers to the districts in order to learn about all types of vehicles entering and going from the Russian army's headquarters. As a result, the Ukrainian army, which was able to detect the aid trucks, discovered that the vehicles took a specific route from the Russian border to the headquarters. Ukraine was also aware that stopping these trucks would cause a significant pause in the Russian army because the Russian army already had a very restricted supply of ammunition. The majority of the ammunition discovered was from outdated and ineffective guns. As a result, while every truck that arrives is critical for the soldiers, it is also known that in some areas it has become a question of life and death. Russia, which lacks sufficient army manpower, was cutting back on soldier necessities in order to keep the war going. The Russian army, which compensated for the financial shortfalls produced by its irrational policies with soldiers' welfare, was putting its own army in peril. As a result, the delay in subsequent trucks meant that the soldiers could face severe hunger. The soldiers who were being challenged by hunger were becoming weaker by the day and had no strength left to fight. As a result, the capture of these vehicles by Ukraine could have been a significant turning point in the course of the war in several locations. After determining the Russian army's route, the Ukrainian army chose the best location for an ambush. After determining that alleyways were the best places for this, Ukraine's plan had been shaped to include tall skyscrapers. He intended to carry out his scheme on a roadway along the route taken by lorries headed to the Ukrainian city of Lyman. The inability to grow armaments near the strategically significant city of Lyman could possibly allow Ukraine to achieve entire supremacy in this region. As a result, the Ukrainian army planted mines on the chosen street in order to fully destroy the Russian munitions trucks. At the same time, the Ukrainian army planted remote-controlled bombs beneath nearby buildings. As a result of the Ukrainian army totally blocking the road, Russia's intact trucks would also be unable to flee. At the same time, a large number of trained soldiers were brought to the area for this operation. The Ukrainian army, desperate to ensure the plan's success, was willing to go to any length for this operation. The Ukrainian army carried out this critical operation while maintaining the highest level of security. As a result, Russian ammo trucks leaving the Russian border and heading to Lyman found no knowledge about this operation. The Russian forces who were traveling along their customary path had gone without taking any precautions. They had no idea, however, that the Ukrainian army was waiting for them with a well-organized strategy. When the trucks entered the area, the Ukrainian army, which had been tracking them since they crossed the Russian border, initiated the operation. When the munitions truck in front advanced to the mine location, a large explosion occurred. The armored truck nearly blew up, shocking the Russian troops. Although the remaining vehicles attempted to flee, a second shock was delivered by the explosion that occurred behind the convoy. The Russian soldiers had nowhere to flee because the route was totally blocked on both sides of the roadway. Furthermore, the Ukrainian soldiers who appeared were neutralizing the Russian soldiers who emerged from their vehicles and began fire one by one. However, the Russian soldiers had to accept that they could not hurt the Ukrainian soldiers who had spent a long time training for this mission. Following that, the Russian soldiers who did not want to be killed thought that surrendering was the best option. As a result, the soldiers who surrendered to the Ukrainian army ensured that all of the munitions they were carrying was given to the Ukrainian army. The Ukrainian army's main aim in this operation was to eliminate the Russian army's fighting strength. However, this operation, which resulted in Ukraine's victory, not only damaged the Russian force, but also allowed the Ukrainian army to strengthen because all of the ammunition that could not be transferred to the Russian army was now in the possession of the Ukrainian army. The Ukrainian army had attained extraordinary strength as a result of this, having transported all of the weaponry that they had been unable to obtain. One of the most important reasons for this was that the explosives sent were substantially larger in quantity than the regular ones. The Ukrainian troops, astonished by what they saw, understood that their victory was considerably larger than they had anticipated. Although the Ukrainian army's excellent strategy was vital at this time, the Russian army's deception was also at a level that could not be disregarded. The caravan, which had left without taking any reasonable and essential precautions, was approaching an open target. The main reason for this was that no protection for these men was provided. The Russian authorities did not conduct any flights along the routes of these departing vehicles and did not notice any road hazards. The reason for this is assumed to be that Russia, which does not have a sufficient quantity of unmanned aerial vehicles, deploys these vehicles in various places. While the Ukrainian army gained such a big victory, the Russian army suffered an equally great defeat. The soldiers, who were already fatigued owing to the inability of supplies to reach the headquarters, were forced to combat hunger. The Russian soldiers, who couldn't even meet their most basic nutritional needs, discovered a solution by fleeing the headquarters. Some soldiers blacked out their eyes in order to flee, even though they knew they would be shot if caught. Some soldiers are known to have surrendered to the Ukrainian army by saying the Ukrainian line, "I want to live." Russian military must now contend not only with Ukrainian technology, but also with weaponry manufactured in Russia. Russian soldiers are terrified of being shot with their own weapons. Soldiers attempting to manage a massive conflict using Soviet air improvised weapons have completely lost hope as a result of this move. These unwilling troops are tired of being treated inhumanely in this war that they were compelled to fight. Russian soldiers who have been put under a much larger weight than they can carry are being pushed more and more by the daily defeats. The lack of a response from the Kremlin to all of this has heightened Russian citizens' anxieties. The public are outraged at the lack of response, claiming that the authorities' policies are to blame for the army's massive losses, while the entire world continues to call for the end of the war. Russian President Vladimir Putin is believed to be launching fresh initiatives. It is maintained that Putin, who puts his subjects at peril for his own gain, should be removed from power. The information released by British intelligence has shocked the entire world. While Ukraine's recent accomplishments have inflicted a significant blow to Russia, Putin has gone insane with rage in recent days. There have been significant developments in the Russian-Ukrainian war. At the start of these, it was discovered that significant explosions were carried out in Russia as a result of actions organized by Ukraine in the beginning. The Russian army and the Kremlin were deeply concerned about the situation during the operations it coordinated. The Ukrainian army blew up the Russian central bases, one after the other. Ukraine gradually reclaimed the conquered territory. Russia was compelled to withdraw from the conquered regions. The international press was taken aback by this event. One of the most stunning elements in recent reports has been the extent to which the fighting in Ukraine has extended. Following that, the British Ministry of Defence's reports stunned the entire globe. Russia has recently begun to prioritize air defenses. The most crucial component of the report was that Russia was attempting to enhance its land-based air defenses, but had been unable to do so since the beginning of the conflict. The Russian army, which has been working on this since the invasion began on February 24, is still vulnerable to a deep air strike. The significance of the newly operational long-range Patriot missiles became clear at this moment because in recent days when Moscow has come within striking distance, Russia has been unable to foresee what Ukraine will do. This was highlighted once again by Ukraine's latest operation. Ukraine has organized a massive offensive against Russia's air base at Engels. This incident has drastically altered the way air strikes are used in combat. The significance of this air facility in Russia's Saratov region was considerable. The Russian army used unmanned aerial vehicles to demolish this strategically critical site. Russian planes have been made unable to attack as a result of this operation. In addition, 3 invading Russian soldiers were killed. The Kremlin immediately issued a red alert in response to this incident. Security measures have been strengthened at all Russian air bases. The Russian soldiers were in a state of panic as the planes were being hauled to the hangars. While the Ukrainian army's operations continued at full pace, another operation was carried out using an unmanned aerial vehicle. This action demonstrated once again how Ukraine, which does not have warplanes, has achieved a significant air dominance over Russia. Citizens who live in the vicinity where the operation took place reported hearing a big boom. However, the operation's outcome cannot be predicted with certainty. Although Russian sources claim to have detonated Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicles, hardly one believes these claims to be credible because, according to Russian sources, while all operations are effective, all Ukrainian attacks are easily repelled. However, the truth does not shy away from revealing itself on the battlefield. Nobody trusts the authoritarian regime's propaganda in Russia. The reason for this skepticism is because Putin seeks to justify himself at all times. The major reason for this is that Putin's victory in this battle to reclaim his lost power is vital to the continuation of his lost power, is vital to the continuation of his administration. That is why the entire international press is waiting for statements from Ukraine's relevant authorities. This anticipation stems from the fact that the Ukrainian operation occurred immediately following the publication of the British Information Service report. Because this attack demonstrated that the British were correct in many ways, because it is well known that Russia is unable to safeguard its air bases, Ukraine will undoubtedly resume similar operations. Another fire broke out shortly after this one. The source of this information is Saint. He had arrived from a very important port in St. Petersburg, Ukraine, allegedly used unmanned naval vehicles to assault an oil ship at this port, striking Russia almost in the heart. This event has demonstrated that Russia does not have an active defense in the border corridors and does not have the necessary equipment to do so. The oil-laden ship in the harbor caught fire fully. Other ships in the area were hurriedly evacuated. In its pronouncements, the Kremlin attempted to downplay the incident by claiming that it did not know who carried out the strikes because Russia no longer wants to appear powerless in the face of Ukraine in the international press. The image of a country unable to defend its borders is a big hit to Putin's reputation, which has suffered serious blows in foreign affairs. A fleet of ships had caught fire not long before this tragedy. The Kremlin, which maintained that the fire was also caused by a malfunction, once again refused to blame Ukraine. This allowed the public's reservations regarding the war, especially recently, to be expressed once more. In many respects, the people are aware that war is on the horizon, and Russia's announcement of successive mobilizations concerns the entire Russian population. One of those expected in the near future is Ukraine's cross-border operation to Russia in response to these. This is because the Ukrainian army, which has come forward with the fresh ammunition it has gotten, is using it quickly. The fires that erupted in Russia, one after the other, have driven Putin insane. Firefighters began to struggle to keep up with these fires. Allegedly, each of these sabotages was carried out by Ukraine, which is accountable for these fires. Certain operations which pose a danger to Russia's supremacy in certain areas have expanded to the point that Putin is powerless to intervene. Although Russia deploys drones to combat these flames, it cannot achieve the desired efficiency unless the fires are extinguished. Behind these ineffective measures has been a massive shambles in the Kremlin because many senior officials believe Russia should exit the conflict now. Although Putin does not take his remarks seriously because they have an opposition organization, no one knows how much this conflict will cost. Some of Ukraine's areas are highly fertile and abundant in natural resources. Putin allegedly sold these natural resources to someone before completing the occupation. This individual is Yevgeny Prigozhin, the founder and director of Wagner, and one of the commanders we have seen active from the start of the war. Prigozhin is one of the high-ranking leaders that is adamant on keeping the war going. He meddles in Russia's domestic affairs with his men who cause instability in the army. This situation is still causing significant problems in Russia. The Russian people have yet to comprehend with what authority Prigozhin intervenes so brazenly in the army. According to reports, Putin promised Prigozhin the Bakhmut area before going to war. Prigozhin wants the battle to continue despite the losses as a result of these pledges because he fears that if the conflict does not continue, he will be unable to collect even mercenary wages for his losses. The main reason of this anxiety is the fact that the Russian economy has reached a stalemate because of the consequences of the conflict. Russia has run a massive budget deficit as it did in every previous time. These deficiencies emerged as a result of his inability to achieve any of the goals set at the start of the war. According to Russian propaganda, the conflict would be over in about a week. Despite this, the fight has been ongoing for about a year. The entire world saw once again that Putin's remarks were completely meaningless. It has been about a year since the budget was entirely finished, thanks to Russia's estimate of even the shells to be deployed against Ukraine from the start of the war. The Russian army, on the other hand, has lost many of the weapons it will employ on the front lines to Ukraine. In other words, this is precisely the source of his desperation against Ukraine, particularly recently. In other words, Putin's errors have resulted in a serious economic crisis in Russia. In contrast, Putin's rocking chair will soon topple him and Russia will regain its independence. The Baltics have made their decision. Putin's fleet will be unable to sail in the Baltic Sea. This vital decision requires a significant quantity of intelligence. Putin has committed to completely different plans. The unprecedented move of Denmark and Norway, which refused to accept this, startled the entire globe. The Ukrainian army made a number of unthinkable operations in the final days of the Russian-Ukrainian war. But at the heart of these movements are the increased support, particularly in recent days. Because of these contributions, the Ukrainian army prevents Russian fleets from breathing in the Black Sea. Putin, on the other hand, found a solution by directing his navies toward the Baltics. But Putin's nefarious scheme has been thwarted by the Baltic states' stern reaction. This strategy was a disaster. The number of countries supporting Ukraine has recently increased dramatically. The Ukrainian army has advanced significantly as a result of these contributions. However, these supports are not necessarily physical. In recent days, Israeli and British intelligence have begun to offer very valuable intelligence to the Ukrainian army. The crucial part of this intelligence was that Putin's takeover would not be limited to Ukraine following this frightening event. Most countries began to seek refuge from Putin. The main cause for this was Putin's policies, which had recently grown highly unstable. However, when it became known that Putin intended to attack neighboring countries, there was a massive uprising in the Baltics. Putin had always taken special care to confine his navies to specific seas. However, with the help of the US and Turkey, and particularly because of his tough stance toward NATO, Putin has been unable to intervene in the Black Sea. As a result, he began to tow all of his ships to a separate shore. This coast, on the other hand, was the Baltics, where Russia had expressed an interest in playing an active role, particularly in recent days, while attempting to avoid US blockades in the Black Sea. The Russian army was confronted with an unexpected maneuver. Norway and Denmark's fighter jets have given Putin hell after the recent nuclear submarine controversy. Putin became restless in the Baltics, despite the fact that several countries voted to leave. Putin was obstinate, but with these fresh findings revealed to the world by British and Israeli intelligence, Putin no longer has a chance in this region. The Russian army has lost its ability to control any region. Norway sent a warning to the Russian fleet as a result of these developments. He has already urged the immediate removal of Russian navies, which are attempting to disturb global peace. However, Putin ignored these warnings because he had now begun to be squeezed from every place. He directed a considerable number of his fleets to this region in order to avoid causing Norway to back down. Norway, on the other hand, was adamant during the Baltic countries' meeting. He signed a number of resolutions with all countries participating in this decision. There was no need for any basis to eject Russia from this region. The Russian fleet has been warned yet again. When the Russian warships refused to budge, Norway and Denmark began detaching their fighter jets and flying close to the Russian naval. Sweden then launched fighter jets against the Russian fleet. This had become drill. However, the frequent dropping of bombs near Russian fleets has caused a major political dilemma. The ships informing the Kremlin were told not to leave the region. However, times have changed. Norway's recent actions have swayed the Russian Navy's opinion. The Russian warships, which Putin warned them not to leave, have now advanced to the point where they can avert a major crisis. Instead of stopping here to appease Putin's ego, the two captains took action to get their ships out of this area. Although the other ships wished to stay, Putin was at a loss for words when the Ukrainian army began to press towards the Bakhmut front from the lower side. He was unable to handle a battle with a new country since he was aware that he was about to lose the war with the Ukrainian army. As a result, he decided to withdraw the navies. This conversation was thwarted by signal jammers in the region. Norway then seized the initiative and began dropping bombs on Russian ships. That was the breaking point. The Russian captains began preparations to leave this area. The Russian Navy's departure has now prevented a major crisis from happening. When Norway placed the signal jammers in the passive position, the Russian captains, who discovered that this was also the Kremlin's instruction, let out a depot. Following that, Putin took action by issuing stern threats. The Russian military revealed that it had left one nuclear submarine in the Baltic Sea. Despite withdrawing all of its fleets, this is the discourse that has sparked action in the United States. The United States quickly dispatched a jet to Iceland, dubbed the Doomsday Plane. However, there was once again a tense mood in the Baltics. However, because the Baltic states did not want conflict, the United States was asked to remain neutral. However, the Russian troops' weaknesses were highlighted even more vividly. Russia's inability to build connections with any country has begun to cause concern throughout the country. The Russians responded by arguing that if so many people believe we did wrong, we should consider it as well. That's when things in Russia became difficult. However, it should be noted that war analysts have widely various interpretations of this. The last comment made by war analysts in particular astonished the entire world. According to military analysts, Putin is also aware that his power is dwindling. As a result, he took steps to launch numerous wars. Although a nuclear war would be disastrous for the entire globe, it has begun to appear that it is Putin's sole option for retaining power. However, there was a widespread belief that Putin would be unable to win the conflict in Ukraine if he continues in this manner. Putin will gain no advantage and the Russian army will face even more difficulties at the start of this. There is a populace affected by Russia's economic woes as a result of the withdrawal of a large number of Western enterprises. Russia experienced a massive economic crisis and unemployment at the start of the war. This unemployment provided the Ukrainian soldiers with a unique perspective because of the actions done by the Ukrainian army. It has been able to capitalize on Russia's rising despondency. However, because the Russian army is unable to end the developing despondency, it has evolved to the point where it is unsure whether it will remain in the Ukrainian region. Russian military have recently begun to achieve various breakthroughs in every subject, as well as a desire for a fundamental shift. Furthermore, while the deepening economic depression highlights the challenges faced by the Russian people in particular, it really allows us to look at them from a different perspective with the facts available to Russia. Because of the unemployment, the Russian people began to diversify their interests. One of these sites is the cemetery, as many soldiers have died as a result of Putin's inept policies. Yes, qualified individuals have begun grave digging or chaplaincy at several industries. However, this is currently the last thing on the Russian people's minds. And in addition to losing relatives for no reason, they are losing their careers. This has begun to pave the path for the Russian army to be left alone in a state of high stress. If the current scenario continues, the Russian people will be unable to feed the Russian army. In other words, if Russia's economic crisis worsens, so will Putin's troubles. And in the end, Putin will be on the losing end of the power equation. This ingenious operation of the Ukrainian army has sat on the agenda of the world. Ukrainian forces survived an incredible attack with a successful operation. The weapons and ammunition that will be used by about 5,000 soldiers are in the hands of the Ukrainian forces, Putin is so bored with the incompetence of the Russian army. Putin has put all the investment he has made into the hands of the Ukrainian forces. The Bakhmut region has been completely cleared of Russian invaders. The Russian invaders will now fight against their own weapons. This operation of the Ukrainian army has caused a shock effect on the world. To a lot of broadcasters are only talking about this opera. The 20 million movement is now in the Ukrainian army. Russian leader Vladimir Putin has lost his K-52 helicopter. This opera of Ukraine has dealt a very big blow to the Russian soldiers who have been trying to occupy the Bakhmut front for a long time. Bakhmut front, where there are about 5,000 soldiers. Putin, who is trying to completely dominate Bakhmut with Putin's last move, decided to withdraw his troops from the Bakhmut front with the blow he received from the Ukrainian forces. The biggest reason and why Russian soldiers want the Bakhmut front so much is the region's wealth of natural resources. Bakhmut, which owned many energy brandies, would provide a large income to the Russian army. These revenues were spent on the military industry and soldiers, and the Russian army, which wants to further increase the ongoing invasion attempts, experienced a great shock. Along with this operation in Ukraine, after the operation, Putin called many Russian commanders to him and talked about how the army did such bad things. At this meeting, Putin was incredibly angry. This meeting, which lasted for 10 people and only 1 hour, also attracted 4 commanders. Putin's anger is increasing every day. The commanders at the meeting argued that Putin's war strategies were absurd. The commanders who thought that this job should be left to those who know now received an answer they never expected from Putin. Putin perceived these speeches of the commanders as actions and had the commanders arrested immediately. He rebelled against Putin while the commanders were arrested and taken to prison. The commanders who shouted that they did not understand any business and that every front that the Russian army lost was because of Putin were silenced by Russian soldiers and put on a military vehicle. The commanders shouting in this way and rebelling against Putin sat on the world agenda. While the whole country is tired of Putin's harsh and repressive policy, the wrong policies he applies to the army are causing soldiers to flee the war. Putin, who sends untrained and inexperienced soldiers to the front without any training, does not care what happens. The Russian army began to suffer incredible losses every day. Russia, which lost about 800 soldiers on the front line every day, completed the first year of the war. The loss of 800 lives every day in the war that has been going on for a year has attracted an incredible reaction from the world. Calls continue to pour in, polls continue to pour into Putin from all over the world. After all, this blow struck by Ukrainian soldiers against the Russian army infuriated Putin. Putin, who wanted to completely occupy Bakhmut, now had to get out of the region. If we come to the detail of this heroic operation organized by the Ukrainian soldiers have been trying to defend Bakhmut for a long time. It seems that this great resistance has borne fruit with the recent operation. The heroic Ukrainian soldier has achieved great things in this operation. While the hot clashes were continuing in the Bakhmut region, Ukraine's advanced intelligence network Bayraktar noticed something incredible while patrolling with its UAVs. Bayraktar noticed that the Russian soldiers' warehouse was completely empty when their UAVs passed over the Russian headquarters while patrolling in the region. When this intelligence was provided to the Ukrainian headquarters, immediate action was taken. The Ukrainian soldiers could have used the empty ammunition depots at the Russian headquarters and won a great victory. The Ukrainian army decided to come up with an ingenious plan. This plan would be as follows: Ukrainian soldiers would fly a drone over the headquarters closely to make sure that the Russian headquarters really ran out of ammunition. And if no attack was carried out on this drone, it would also make it certain that the headquarters was really out of ammunition. After this ingenious plan, the Ukrainian army launched its Bayraktar UAVs and took action to find out if any attacks would come by staying at an altitude close to the Russian decision. When Bayraktar UAVs approached the headquarters, it passed over the headquarters by lowering its altitude in a big sense. In the face of what happened, the Ukrainian army could not believe its eyes. Bayraktar, who passed over the headquarters, was not responded to in any way. The Ukrainian soldiers have made it completely certain that these headquarters remain unarmed. When they made this move, the Ukrainian army, which had managed to expel all the Russian invaders in the region, would be greatly relieved. The operation was launched immediately after the Bayraktar's move. Many Ukrainian troops secretly approached the headquarters. The Ukrainian army approaching the headquarters would neutralize the Russian army by conducting a ground operation with heavy assault weapons. As the Russian headquarters approached, the Ukrainian army opened fire. The headquarters was completely neutralized with many anti-tank guided missiles and assault weapons. Many Russian invaders surrendered to the Ukrainian army. The Ukrainian soldiers searched the headquarters completely to make sure that there was something they could add to their inventory. The Ukrainian forces, who added 6 armored vehicles to their inventory, returned to their headquarters and interrogated the arrested Russian occupiers to find out what the army would do about the Bakhmut region. One of the Russian invaders wanted to make an incredible deal with the Ukrainian commander in this agreement. The Russian military expressed that the Ukrainian army could deal a major blow to Russia with what it has to say, accepting the agreement without question. The Ukrainian commander asked what the soldier wanted. The information given by the soldier only when he was seeking refuge in the territory of Ukraine gave a great victory to the Ukrainian army. What the Russian soldier said was that a large convoy of ammunition and military equipment was on its way to the region, with the Russian headquarters remaining unarmed. The Ukrainian commander who heard this could not believe his ears and took action without losing a second. An ambush would be laid in the direction of the convoy's future, after which all ammunition and military equipment in the convoy would enter the Ukrainian inventory. The Ukrainian army decided to carry out this ambush with the overwhelming force of tanks. German Leopard 2 tanks will be camouflaged and placed on both sides of the road, which is in the form of a plane. And after the road is completely destroyed, the Ukrainian forces will use fog bombs so that the Russian army cannot respond in any way. Together with the effective smoke bombs, the Ukrainian army would enter the trucks and neutralize the Russian invaders, and then add ammunition and military equipment to its army. Leopard 2 tanks, which started moving to the area where the convoy was going to come to organize this operation, were incredibly camouflaged when they arrived at the area where the ambush was going to be laid, and the Leopard 2 tanks, whose barrels were turned to both sides of the road, all they had to do was press the button to get the tank shells out of the barrel. Ukrainian soldiers were waiting with gas masks on both sides of the road and in the area above. Seeing the convoy coming, the Ukrainian soldiers completed their final preparations and began to wait. As soon as the convoy got close to the barrel of the Ukrainian tanks, the button was pressed and made the road completely unusable, blocking the convoy on both sides of the road. Ukrainian soldiers became invisible from eye to eye when they threw smoke bombs on trucks. Ukrainian army soldiers with gas masks on entered the trucks and neutralized the Russian invaders defending the convoy. These ammunition and military equipment sent to about 5,000 soldiers were of incredible size in order to transport these equipment. The Ukrainian army opened the closed road on both sides with Leopard 2 tanks and allowed them to be loaded onto armored tanks. Loading ammunition and military equipment onto trucks, the Ukrainian army returned to its headquarters with shouts of victory. This operation, which managed to expel the Russian invaders from Bakhmut, is being talked about all over the world. After this operation, which has caused the Russian army about 20 million in losses, the Russian army will suffer great hardships. Although Putin tried to make threats after the operation, it is believed that the only thing he has left are nuclear weapons. If any threat is followed up and reciprocated, Putin has nothing left to defend Russia.